Hi everyone, it's Katey, and today I'm not really vlogging because Blair and I pretty much did the exact same thing we did yesterday. We went to the movies early in the morning to see the new Star Wars movie, and then I just walked the dogs and did a bit of shopping. So I decided not to bother you with, yesterday's vlog part 2, and instead I'm going to show you my favourite tarot decks of 2016. I have a lot of decks now and I love all of them. I'm not a person who keeps decks that I don't use, or very few decks I've kept that I don't use. So it was difficult, but I've narrowed it down fairly well, I think, although I still do have quite a few, so we're going to jump right in. So these are in no particular order, and I've done reviews and unboxings of quite a few of these, so I'll leave the links to all of those extra videos down below just in case you're interested in hearing a little bit more about these decks. So the first deck I'm going to show you is the Annika Tower. I have done a review of this one, and in that review I said that this is like a children's picture book, and I stand by that assessment. This deck is so easy to read and I totally love it. I think the reason it's so successful is because it doesn't rely on a lot of that symbolism, that esoteric occult mysticism sort of base that a lot of tarot decks have. It completely takes all of that out. It still has pretty traditional imagery, but instead of using symbolism to convey a meaning, it uses emotion and facial expressions and color and body language, and it does those things really well. So I think this is a great beginner's deck, especially because the court cards are really well portrayed as well. The next is the Surco Tower by Tightrope Press. I got this one. This was one of my first Kickstarters that I've ever backed, and I love this deck. I've only had it for a few months. I'm not really sure. I'm not very good with time, but it hasn't been that long. I think I got it around September. But it has very quickly become a go-to favourite of mine. It is so easy to read with. It's fun and colourful and pretty and all of that stuff, but it's still fairly traditional, but it's not a boring clone of the Rider-Waite-Smith. Some clones just feel kind of like they don't have their own voice because they're just a clone, with someone else's artwork. Whereas this certainly does have its own voice. It's a little bit cheeky, a little bit sassy, but it will still get to the heart of the matter, but in a kind of coy, interesting sort of way. I don't know, I really enjoy working with this deck, and I always get very clear, useful readings out of it. Next up is a very special deck indeed. It is the Tarot of the Crone. This is by the same artist who did the Dark Goddess Tarot. It feels really old, quite dark in a lot of respects. I used it for just like a daily draw once, and I got like 3 major arcanas. Like, that's the sort of deck this is. It's like, don't ask me some silly little question because that's not what we're here for. It has a loving aspect to it, but it's not loving in that gentle motherly way. It's loving in a way that pushes you, that really expects a lot of you. It's powerful. This deck is truly powerful, and I feel like I've only just scratched the surface with this one. Next up is a deck that made it into last year's favourites, although it only kind of just made it in because I'd only just gotten it before I did that video, and that is the Fountain Tarot. This is a deck that I just go back to over and over again, especially for readings for others, but for myself as well. It's just so clear. The clarity of this deck is just almost unmatched. It's got a kindness and a gentleness to it, but in a quiet sort of way. It's not harsh, it's not callous, it's not forceful at all. It's just like, you ask the question, here's what you want to know. It's just absolutely essential as far as I'm concerned, as someone who loves to read for myself but also as someone who reads for others. This deck is absolutely essential to my collection. The Hudes Tarot is kind of like my warmer Fountain Tarot. That's how it feels. This is the backing. This deck is really neutral as well. It's really kind of serene. Some people say that it looks a little bit sad. And I don't really feel that way. I think that it feels contemplative and quiet and reserved. But it's always really good at providing very necessary observations in a very calm, collected, considered sort of way. So I have had some of those reading requests that feel really hot, feel like there's a lot of weight to the question that's being asked, feel like there's a lot writing for this person that I'm doing the reading for. This is often the deck I'll go for, because it's kind of really cool under pressure. This deck I'm really quite excited about is Tarot of the Moon Garden. Tarot of the Moon Garden was my very first deck back when I was about 14, but I acquired this deck again this year and I'm so glad I did. I've been reading with it quite a bit more recently and I've just like re-fallen in love with tarot. I mean, this has like an inner child sort of feel to this deck, a subconscious and inner child feel to it. But then there's also that attachment for me of being the very first deck I ever discovered as a child, as a young person. So this deck definitely brings forth a lot of nostalgia for me and a lot of that inner child happiness and excitement. But because it's got that darker side to it as well as the cutesy side, it doesn't just gloss over stuff like some kind of really super cutesy decks can. It's kind of a mirror for the inner child and it's absolutely beautiful. I love it. I love this deck and I'm so glad that it's back in my life now. The next deck is one that I've recently done a review on, is the Spiral Tarot, so I won't talk about it a lot just because the review I only did last month. I love this deck so much. It's so beautiful, but it's so powerful. There is so much to this deck. The whole premise for this deck basically is that each of the cards very, very strongly represents a scene from mythology, and there's a lot of symbolism that goes into helping convey those messages. It's quite traditional in a lot of its imagery, but because of all of the story and mythology that goes along and the archetypes that go into these cards or that are represented by these cards, it goes much deeper. I think there is a lot of layers to this deck and it's certainly one of my favorites. Next up, I couldn't talk about my favorite decks of 2016 without mentioning this deck. It's the Mystic Faerie Tarot. I love this deck. It's just so fun and playful and I think it's really well done. I really do feel like this is a bit of an underrated deck. And I did a pretty extensive review of this deck because it's interesting in the fact that the suits actually tell a story, so a progressive story from ace to 10. Which is not something I've really seen in many decks. I know it's not entirely original, but it's not something that I see all the time. But perhaps my favorite part of this deck are the title cards. Instead of like a little, you know, advertisement or something, we have a fairy greeting and a fairy farewell. I don't know, there's something about the way these are written. They're short and sweet, but still vibrant. I love these. So as much as I love the deck itself, this I think is a really unique, special touch and that just makes me love it all the more. The last three decks I have to show you are my favorite decks of all time, up to this point anyway. They are the decks that I just feel like I just get, and that get me, but not in like an easy way. I don't feel like I've mastered them and that's why I get them. I feel like they're just on the same level, the same vibration as me, but they still push me. I just absolutely adore these decks. The first is the Liminal Tarot. It comes in this awesome little tin. This was a limited edition and it's now out of print. I did a whole walkthrough of this deck when I first got it actually. I just adore everything about this deck. It is so beautiful. It's quite traditional, fairly traditional in terms of the Rider-Waite-Smith imagery for the most part. Then I show you this card and it's not at all. But the imagery is inspired, the art type is inspired by that scene in the Thoth deck. So it's very much a Rider-Waite-Smith deck, but inspired by the artwork of the Thoth, which I love because I've always been really attracted to the artwork of the Thoth, but never particularly attracted to the Thoth. So this is really quite a nice little compromise for me. This is a deck that I will use to read for others sometimes, but only on occasion. For the most part, this is a fairly personal deck. The next is the fantastic Menagerie Tarot by Babara Studios. This was a limited edition and is now out of print, but as we all know, Babara Studios likes to reissue their old decks, so you never know. This one might be back out in a couple of years. I adore this deck. It is based on the artwork of J.J. Granville, and this deck has character. This deck is funny and sassy and cheeky and can be a little bit nasty, but in a really, really tongue-in-cheek kind of way. It is really witty. It has a really interesting take on a lot of those really stock standard traditional cards. Overall, it is very much a Rider-Waite deck, but the imagery kind of plays with our idea of what these cards mean. There's so many cards that just kind of make you stop and go, oh, hang on, what's going on there? Oh, I'm not sure how I feel about that. That's why I love this deck, is because it makes me think about tarot and the cards in the deck differently. It's so cleverly done and I just adore it. And to those of you who know me, this final deck should come as no surprise. It is the Gill Tarot. This deck is just 150% me. I just adore it. I don't know what it is. It's just something that I get with this deck, and this deck gets me, and I don't read for others with this deck. I really just don't think I could. This is a deck that I can use for really quick fire, you know, daily draws. And it's also the deck that I go to quite often when I'm not feeling good and I need an honest but heartfelt and kind message. If you watched my vlog last week, I used this deck when I did a reading for myself to kind of check back in with myself after my brother was in a car accident. That's what this deck is for me. It's a rock. It's home. But it's never a pushover. You know, it never just gives me the answers I want. It gives me the answers I need, but in a really productive way. It's my absolute soul deck, my home deck, whatever you want to call it. This is my deck. So of course it has to rank #1 for my favorites of 2016. So that's it. Those are my favorite decks of 2016. Quite a few, I know, but these are the decks that I've used a lot this year and that I've gotten great readings from. So I will be doing 2 more videos. I'll be doing a video about my favorite Oracle decks of the year, which should be quite a bit shorter, and I'll also be doing a video about my favorite books of the year. I will also leave links to any reviews or unboxings or videos, relevant videos that I've done in the description box below, just in case you're interested in learning more about these decks and what I think about them. But that's enough. This is already going to be a long enough video, so if you have any more comments or questions, leave those below and I will get back to you. And until tomorrow, guys, so much love. Bye.